Good morning and welcome to this Construction Management and BIM Plus webinar, Information Management's Role in Easing and Avoiding Disputes in Association with Mail Manager. Our webinar programme today, following information management best practice, could help you avoid or minimise the impact of contractual disputes. Documents lost and scope changes saved in emails and nowhere else. In this webinar, our speakers will highlight the mistakes to avoid and the best practice to follow to help ensure information management is helping you. There'll be a Q&A session after both speakers have concluded their presentations. Let me introduce our speakers. Ellie Greatholder, UK Director Commercial and Legal at Buro Happold, will give an in-house lawyer's perspective of where a lack of information and information management makes life difficult, some of the practical challenges and some potential solutions, and why it matters now more than ever. Huw Knipe, Enterprise Account Executive at Mail Manager, will analyse the results of Mail Manager's annual State of AEC Project Management Survey. Last year's survey revealed that nearly half of the 500 plus respondents reported that project information relating to scope changes resides in staff emails. I'm Justin Stanton, editor of BIM Plus, contributor to Construction Management, and I'm your chair this morning. Bit of housekeeping before we introduce Ellie. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions. You can pose questions as yourself or anonymously. The speakers will address your questions in the Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand via the original registration link later today. There's 1 hour's CPD credit for those that complete the webinar before the 23rd of April. So that's enough from me. So Ellie, if you're ready, do you want to? I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thanks.
Share yours.
Thanks, Justin. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. I can just get the technology to work for a second. Okay. Hopefully that's working for you, Justin. Can you give me a quick head nod or thumbs up if that's okay?
There's nothing showing at the moment.
It's a good start, isn't it?
Always works fine in rehearsal. It's fine.
Okay. Try again.
Yep, it's coming up.
There now?
Yep, perfect.
Yep, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, as I say, it's great to be here. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm hoping that even if there's nothing hugely new here, I'm sure we understand, the majority of us, the information management importance in the role of disputes already. I think it's always a useful topic to revisit and keep at the front of our minds and the top of our agenda, given its importance. So, by way of very brief introduction, so my name's Ellie Greatholder, as Justin's mentioned. I am the UK Director for Commercial and Legal at Buro Happold. I qualified as a solicitor in 2008 in the Great Recession. Come back to that in a minute. And I've specialised for my whole career in construction and engineering law. Started off in private practice for the first 7 years or so of my career, and then latterly moved on in-house, originally with EDF Energy, working on the Hinkley Point C project and dealing with their contract management and dispute avoidance predominantly. And joined Buro Happold in 2021. It's been a very fast 2 years and very enjoyable one. I'm now responsible predominantly for claims management at Buro Happold, amongst other things. Buro Happold being an international integrated consultancy of engineers, designers and advisors. We've got a presence in 37 locations worldwide with over 80 partners and 2,500 employees. So that's kind of me, where I've come from. Very happy, as Justin said, to take questions at the end. So please do pop your questions in the box if there is anything that I speak about that you'd like to discuss further, individually or today. So information management in the current climate, and I guess I just wanted to do a bit of scene setting, and I know that Huw will do an even better job of this when he speaks after me, but I just wanted to set some context around why we're talking about this now, why it's more important than ever to be talking about this topic now, and how to future-proof your business and protect it from potential events and claims. We are And we all know this, and it's in the news all the time, and it's all around us. We are living in very uncertain times at the moment. Are we in recession? Question mark. I think we were told just last week that we may have narrowly avoided it, but nonetheless, I think there was talk about the UK economy being the only one in Europe that had shrunk post-COVID. Things certainly aren't cheerful, even if we are not technically in recession. We all know, and this kind of is the link back to the Great Recession that I qualified into, and perhaps the reason I ended up working in construction disputes from the beginning. We all know that recession, and when times are tough economically, disputes go up. And again, I know Huw's got some really interesting statistics from surveys that Mail Manager have done to back that fact up in a moment. But the rate of disputes is high at the moment. We are living in uncertain times, as I say, post-COVID. The Great Resignation that we saw happening predominantly last year, again, there's argument whether that's over or not, but nonetheless, I've termed it staff churn there, which is not particularly attractive term of phrase, but we are seeing, we're seeing it ourselves, and I think we're seeing it throughout the construction sector. The shortage of resource, or the competition for good people, is not decreasing, it's fair to say, and that's got some impacts on information management and its importance, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. We've also got the Building Safety Act to contend with alongside all of that, and I'm sure all of you on the call are growing in familiarity around that, as I am, and we'll talk a little bit about that again in a moment too. Impact of hybrid working. Inevitably, hybrid working has an impact on the way that information is produced and the way that it's managed and stored and shared, and that gives us another element of challenge amongst all this. So fundamentally, accurate records make the difference whether an issue will grow legs and become a bigger issue and full dispute, and if it does, whether a case is won or lost, regardless of what actually happened. We know that good records act as a shield and a sword, and it's really important to get it right. So what records are we talking about? I guess all of them on the screen apart from those in the top left. I guess in the current age, there is an absolutely huge range of information out there that counts as a record. And I'll come on to it again in a little bit, but there's increasing challenges as technology improves and as people are using and adapting to the use of technology more and more. Fundamentally, we're talking about any kind of record of anything that happens during a construction project. So we're talking about photographs, site diaries, timesheets, handwritten notes during meetings, text messages, WhatsApp, I've even heard about Snapchats being used recently. We've got information that is stored electronically increasingly, but we've also still got hard copy documents that are in existence and are used. Obviously, we've got lots and lots of emails and lots of documents. So there's a huge range of records that we're talking about here. And why do they matter? So the first thing I want to say before we get into the bits around kind of disputes and claims is just that having good records is an absolute prerequisite for a good, well-managed construction project. It's good practice, and it's really important for managing a contract and for monitoring progress. It provides an audit trail of what's happened when. It's proof that you've undertaken what you were supposed to undertake. And we'll come on to it in a minute, it is also required contractually in a number of cases. So beyond it being there purely to defend yourself or put forward a claim, it's really important to think of records and information management as just a bare necessity in the success of a project. It is, however, a basic requirement also for the production of claims and defending against claims from others. So, as I've got on the slide there, accurate and focused records do reduce conflict because you're able to reconstruct events from the materials that were produced at the time, and that's really important. Rather than a he said, she said argument that happens later on, you've got the ability to prove to somebody else, a third party if needed, be it an adjudicator, a judge, whoever, what happened at the time. You can tell the story with real life evidence. Contemporaneous documents as I say, help those that aren't familiar with the history. And I'll come on in a minute to kind of speak a little bit about my own personal experience in-house and the challenges that I see in kind of putting forward or defending claims on behalf of Buro Happold. A lot of that difficulty is me trying to unpick the story. So lots of the story is held in people's heads, or as Huw will tell us, in people's inboxes. And the important thing for me in order to be able to produce a good claim or a good defence is being able to look at records to understand for myself what the story is, what happened when, who did what, where's the evidence. There are minimum requirements for putting a claim forward, as I'm sure we're all aware. So drawings, documents, meeting minutes, emails, evidence in communications. And the better the records you are, the easier it is to support your assertions and avoid a drawn out battle. Ultimately, my experience from working on construction disputes for the time I have been is that the party with the most records is most likely to win. It's that simple, effectively. If it can't be evidenced, it didn't happen. I think there's a famous phrase that anything that happens without it being in writing is worth as much as the paper it's written on. So say no more. I'm sure some of you will have seen this quote before from Max Abrahamson from Engineering Law and IC Contracts, but it's one I come back to very often with my own teams. A party to a dispute, particularly if there is an arbitration, but you can read their litigation or adjudication actually, will learn 3 lessons, often too late. Important bit. The importance of records, the importance of records, and the importance of records. And I could not agree more from my perspective with that statement. I mentioned a moment ago that there are contractual requirements quite often around the maintenance of records too. So all of the standard form contracts, and I did double check this myself this week, so JCT, ICE, the FIDIC and NEC contracts all include the reference to the need for submission of records, or they might call them particulars or various documents in certain circumstances, and particularly as you'd expect where a party is seeking additional time or money or putting forward any other claim. And I guess historically it was less common to see condition precedent requirements in contracts, but again, I'm sure we've all seen that's becoming increasingly common. And the NEC is, I was going to say notorious, but well known for the condition precedents contained within that contract. And there are some very strict condition precedents about provision of records in order to put forward certain claims, which shouldn't be forgotten. I can't be a lawyer and do a talk of this nature without mentioning a little bit of case law. So just a very quick reference to the case of Attorney General for the Falkland Islands against Gordon Forbes Construction. This is a relatively old case now, but remains good law. This was all to do with a FIDIC contract, specifically clause 53 of the FIDIC conditions in the 4th edition. And the judgment here talked about what are contemporaneous records, and concluded that they did mean, as you'd probably expect, original or primary documents or copies of those that were produced at the time giving rise to a claim, whether by or for the contractor or employer. What contemporaneous records do not mean are witness statements that are given after the time. And it's really important to note that 3rd point on here, that in that judgment, it was concluded that where there's no contemporary record, as defined above, to support a claim, the claim fails. So that's why this stuff matters so much, and is why we're talking about it today. We've now got kind of an extra reason to focus on information management, I guess, thanks to the Building Safety Act. I mentioned at the beginning, I think we're probably all still grappling with some of the detail around that, but what we do know is that the golden thread requirements that were introduced by the Building Safety Act are only going to increase the importance of written records and information management. I'm sure you're all aware on the call that the golden thread is all about a higher standard of information, so hugely relevant. Keeping that information to support the building safety regulator in being assured that buildings are being managed safely. And they represent that favourite phrase of many lawyers and project managers, the single source of the truth, which is hugely important. We will come back to that. There's a recognition that there's been a previous lack of information, which has posed a lot of safety challenges. and an intention for the original design intent and detail of what was built to be preserved, and changes managed through a formal review process, so no surprises. So that building information management needs to tick lots of boxes. It needs to be the building's single source of truth. It needs to be available to the people who need the information to do a job, i.e. easily accessible. It needs to be presented in a way that the person can actually use it. It needs to be available when they need it, and it needs to be kept securely and kept digitally. And although here we're talking about the golden thread and the Building Safety Act specifically, I think probably those points around that circle on the slide at the moment would apply equally to any other need for information management. It certainly would apply to what I would like from a disputes perspective. So the other thing that the Building Safety Act has introduced, as we're probably all aware now, is extended limitation periods. So the Building Safety Act has amended the limitation period in which a potential claimant can bring a claim under the Defective Premises Act from 6 years from the completion of a dwelling to either a 30-year limitation period for dwellings that were completed before June last year, or 15 years for dwellings due to be completed from June last year onwards. That is clearly a huge increase and a huge widening of the scope for potential liability, often very long after the right to bring an action under the contract has expired. The scope for potential claims is really broad, and this is quite an important point I'm again trying to emphasise to my own teams. Potential claims include not just for safety defects, but any defect which, when the building is completed, could make a dwelling unfit for habitation. And importantly, lots of the commentary is suggesting that that can include defects that cause distress or inconvenience. So not just what you think of typically in terms of fire. For those projects then before that were completed before June last year, clearly a real particular practical challenge is going to be proving the condition of the property at completion. And it's important that we start considering now the extent of available evidence in preparation for any potential claims there. It's important now, when we're going through this process ourselves, of identifying any high-risk projects and retrieving whatever documents that we do have, and making sure that we keep hold of those very safely and amend our document retention policies accordingly. Obviously, it's now too late to implement the best practice that we would be putting into place now and going forward. And I guess different businesses will have had kind of different levels of information kept from that time, and there may or may not be much we can do about that now. But I think it's important to, as I say, kind of think ahead, think what might come, and have a look now at what records you do or don't have. And I guess the bit that we do have more control about are buildings that are completed from now on effectively. And it's really important there that records are retained for the duration of that relevant liability period. And here it is important to note that the liability period might reset on completion of any remedial or refurbishment works. So when I talk about the 15 years, it may well be that that's extended. So this will involve considering document retention policies for projects going forward. So that's kind of the why. Why does all of this matter? So what's so difficult about it? And I know I'm probably preaching to the converted, and everyone on the call has probably experienced this themselves. But we've talked already about the huge volumes of information. Saving information, where is stuff saved and how is it saved? Searching information, how do you quickly get your hands on what you need? How do you retrieve that information? There's a huge mix of types of information. I've spoken already about the difference between electronically stored information, hard copy information, information that's held on personal devices, information that's held on employer devices. We've talked already again about the change in employees and the impact that has. People leave, people move on. What happens to their hard copy notebook that they've written all their minutes from very important meetings where huge things were agreed between parties? And hybrid working. I've got notebooks everywhere at home with little notes that I've scribbled. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. What impact does that have? All of this makes it more difficult. So this is kind of just my musings from an in-house perspective, I suppose, of some of the things that keep me awake at night and keep me worried in this particular area. So locating evidence buried in endless chains of emails. And again, I know Hugh's going to touch on this in a moment with some really interesting findings from the research that Mail Manager have undertaken. But the first thing I will do when I'm told about a potential issue, either that might be brought against us or that we might want to take against somebody else, where's our evidence? And 99% of the time, I'd say my experience is that it's in an email somewhere. How do I find that email? What if the person's left? What's the process internally for being able to access leavers' emails? If your inbox looks anything like mine, it's not massively organized. What search functions are you relying on? What document management processes have you got in place to be able to kind of get your hands on that information very quickly? I've talked already about what happens when staff leave, and that's both electronic and hard copy information. Filling in gaps in evidence because things have been lost. So this comes back to that case law I was mentioning earlier about what is a contemporaneous record and what is it not. Witness statements after the event are better than nothing, but they're not always going to help. Are there other ways that we can fill in those gaps? Have we got meeting minutes written down somewhere? Contemporaneous records won't always be electronic, and they won't always be on employer-owned equipment. So this is my point about people using their own mobile phones increasingly. And I think there's a kind of culture, and there's a different way that people write and people store things on a phone when they're bashing something out in a 5-minute gap between a meeting than they might necessarily if they were sat at a desk writing something formally by email or a letter. Notebooks, what do we do with those? All of these kind of things add to the complication. Another kind of common frustration, I guess, is gaining access to portals containing shared folders where the owner has subsequently denied access. So it might be that you start a project with a shared information system, which latterly you don't get access to. Stuff you can do about that, obviously making sure that you're saving copies of things that are on there, whether that's realistic or not over the whole lifespan of a project, and whether you're going to have saved the one document that you really need at a point later in time, who knows. For older projects, locating hard copy documents can be really difficult. And we have experienced, literally yesterday, I had to send a paralegal in our team to wander down the road to one of our archive warehouses to go and help try and find a copy of a contract that I could do with looking at. Really difficult, really difficult. Archive materials need to be properly indexed and organised in order for them to be easily retrieved. And that's a useful practical pointer. Again, we can't change what's already happened in the past. Working out which version of an electronic document was actually sent out after there's been lots of revisions and edits is something that I find quite challenging on a fairly frequent basis. So that comes back to great document hygiene in terms of labeling, dating, putting version numbers on documents when you're saving them. Those simple things can make life so much easier later on. A lack of recording in a sensible way, confirmation and clarity around verbal agreements that have been made during meetings. So I speak from bitter experience here that I would say the vast majority of disputes that I help on, both in private practice and in my in-house career, have been where a contract hasn't been administered strictly in accordance with the contractual terms that were agreed at the outset. That can happen for a variety of reasons. It's not always it's not criticism per se. Sometimes it's because the contract gets put in the bottom drawer and people ignore it and just do what they think is right. My own views and lack of sympathy there. But there's also lots of circumstances where actually the project just changes so much that the contract no longer provides an answer, if you like, for what's occurred, or people want to change things for whatever reason. There's also a huge piece here about scope creep, which is a kind of a personal trigger for me as a disputes lawyer in-house. Evidencing what's been agreed, who's doing what are the limitations of that, what have we excluded from that, what are the assumptions of that, all of those things that you probably will have talked about very competently and in detail. Those things typically don't get recorded brilliantly. If they get recorded at all, often all of the detail won't sit with it. Sometimes there's no evidence in writing at all to try and explain this, and you're relying on a kind of he said, she said argument years down the line. Really difficult to unpick. And then there's our classic so of the lack of time, both in my experience, both for my own team from a legal team's perspective, but also more importantly, I guess, from our project team's perspective. Their job is not to deal with kind of dispute management per se. Their job is to manage contracts properly, but they are fee earners ultimately in our business, and kind of saving emails and document management is not high on their agenda, however much they understand the importance of it. And I've got sympathy with that. It's also not seen as a particularly exciting job, which is completely fair enough. Again, sitting and saving emails and managing your files properly is often kind of viewed as a nice to have, or something that you might do if you get a spare half an hour on a Friday afternoon. I think the important thing is you probably, those of you on the call, have had your own experiences in this. Once you've been through a dispute process, you suddenly become much better at this stuff, and you really realise and see the advantage of kind of working as you go in a methodical way that will save you a whole lot of hassle later on. And then the last point I've got on here about the threat of adjudication is, I guess, the piece that again makes all of this so important in our industry, where every party has the right to adjudicate at any time. It can come at you very quickly. The process is quick and dirty. You do need to be able to get your hands on the relevant documents really quickly. And I guess, as I say, that's the bit that keeps me up at night, I guess. So just finally, what can we do? And I'm going to hand over to Huw to kind of talk about this in a bit more detail, but setting yourself up for success from the start. So, I mean, again, I would say this, I'm a lawyer. Use the contract to help you. So use the contract to set out an agreement about what documents between you are going to be kept, how are they going to be shared, what's required for what, how are they going to be created, where are they going to be stored, how long are they going to be stored for. And if you can get that into your contract so there's complete clarity about what's required, and if you can also, even better for bonus points, kind of touch on it, however briefly, in a kickoff meeting so that everybody is aware of what's required. I think that's a really useful way of making sure that this stuff is at the top of people's agenda from the off on both sides. Find a way to, this is not a hugely pragmatic advice, I'm going to rely on Huw for this, but find a way to gather evidence from records quickly in a way that allows you to search quickly, filter information fast. Obviously, there's lots of document management and email filing software out there, and it can be really, really helpful to use that. Find the solution that works for you and your needs of the future, bearing in mind the increase in volumes of information that we've talked about. And also use it properly, like any management system, database, whatever. It's only as useful as the information that goes into it. So it's great to get those things in place, but they need to be used and people need to be trained on using them. A little tip that I've deployed in various places along my career: use templates as much as possible. If you give a project team a template that they need to produce every time they agree a variation, for instance, whether that's used externally or just internally, it means the key information, they will have that prompt to provide that key information every time. Really useful. Treat every record, this is probably my top tip, if there's one thing that you can't take away from this, treat every record as if it were associated to a developing dispute so that you can spot your gaps and your vulnerabilities. You'll be doing that from a heightened awareness perspective if you're doing it as if there's a dispute in place, and which will make you think carefully about what might be needed when, and help you fill those gaps before they appear. Train your teams, especially those on the ground, about what records are needed and how to store them, and audit that if you can. I know I'm probably sounding like I'm talking from an ivory tower as a lawyer, but these things can be so, so helpful. And we've talked already about the importance of this in the current climate. And think about the quality of your records. So this is, I guess, another bugbear of mine. Your records are no use unless they're clear and somebody else can pick them up and understand them. Avoid lots of technical jargon, acronyms. Don't use shorthand. Remember the basics about dating things, putting down the time and the location. Don't over rely on technology. If you've got, for instance, site photographs, yes, they might be stamped digitally, but actually it's really helpful just when they're saved to be saved with the time and the location in the document file. So I'm going to hand over to Huw, but I'm obviously looking forward to hearing what he says and be around for the Q&A at the end. So thank you very much.
Ellie, thank you very much. That was fantastic. Really compelling presentation. So Huw, it's over to you once Ellie stops sharing her screen.
Which
Great,
Ellie's
thanks,
desperately
Ellie.
trying to do. Sorry, Huw, bear with me.
No problem. It's great to hear your kind of perspective from all the kind of the coal face of disputes, and kind of hearing what kind of the day-to-day life of that kind of looks like.
Just
You can't turn me off, can you, Justin? I'm struggling to.
no, because it's your. Oh, there you go. You've done it. That's it. Yep.
Cool.
There
Okay.
we go. Perfecto.
Good. Thank you.
It's with you, Huw.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Justin. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. So as a bit of an introduction, my name's Huw. I'm part of the kind of new business team at Mail Manager, and I'll be kind of walking you through our research report that we've recently compiled. So Mail Manager, I did then run an annual survey called the State of AEC Project Management Research Report, and that aims to discover the project management and collaboration challenges facing businesses globally in the architecture, engineering and construction or AEC industries. The report explores how firms manage project information, where they store it, how they go about retrieving data to chase payments and when facing legal disputes, as Ellie touched upon. Plus, it provides insight into how the industry has been affected by the current global economy, including the cost of living crisis, supply chain issues, and the latest building regulations. As you can see on the screen, this year we surveyed over 550 AEC leaders from businesses around the world, with the majority of respondents coming from the United Kingdom and the United States. Our respondents work in varied roles in their organizations, such as CEOs, CFOs, COO, presidents, directors, owners, and more. So let's jump into the main findings of the report. First, the majority of firms cannot easily access their project information. We found that only 10% of respondents were not concerned about the accessibility and visibility of their project information. So that means the majority see this as a big challenge. Only 2% of respondents never need to retrieve emails from past projects. Second, over a quarter of organizations are at risk when staff leave the business. More firms are aware of the importance of filing emails as part of their offboarding process when people leave the business than last year. In 2022, less than half of our respondents, around 44%, indicated that employees were required to file all project-related emails into a central location. This year, that number has risen to 58%, which is great to see. Unfortunately, 28% still do not require emails to be filed, so this information is lost. Third, disputes are continuing to rise year on year. In our 2021 report, 63% said they came across some form of dispute in the business, and this year the number is 91%. Project scope changes and payments continue to be the leading causes of these disputes. Considering the majority of project scope information resides in email and formal documents, and firms cannot easily access this, it's hardly surprising that they are continuing to dig themselves into trouble. Finally, email is still the most used communication and collaboration tool in the industry. More than 4/5 of our respondents report that most of their project correspondence is via email. Only 19% of respondents use email for less than half of their project correspondence, indicating it is still the most used communication and collaboration tool for AEC organizations. When asked about their business's reliance on email, 11% of people surveyed say that email is now business critical in their organization, with most people agreeing that reliance on email has increased in the last 12 months. For the purpose of the session today, we'll only be focusing on the disputes angle of our research, but we will be emailing a copy of the full research report this afternoon, and my colleague Nicola will post it in the chat now. So according to the World Bank, we are currently in the second year of sharply slowing economic growth, only overshadowed by the global recessions in 2009 and 2020. In the AEC, we're seeing trends where costs are on the rise, margins are tighter than ever, and there are large staff cutbacks. Even larger firms in the UK have reported huge drop-offs in profits as their staff costs are increasing, and unfortunately, more firms are going into administration than ever. With so much uncertainty and so many people leaving businesses, there's a strong need for organizations to think about their information management. How can you be sure that you have access to all documents and correspondence if your staff are to leave the business? Considering 28% of businesses do not have an email filing as part of their offboarding process, and 81% of firms use email for the majority of project correspondence, thousands of firms are at great risk of losing information. Even more concerning is the finding that 55% of those surveyed indicated they have no email management systems in place at all. It's clear that the email is dead claims are inaccurate. In 2023, 88% of survey respondents indicated that their overall volume of emails has increased in the last 12 months, a stark increase from the year before. And the contents of these emails are becoming more important than ever, with 11% of people claiming it is now business critical. On top of this, almost 2/3 of AEC businesses regularly need to retrieve emails from their past projects, with only 2% never having the need. Over the last 3 years of this research report, these numbers have remained consistent. Many can relate to not always needing to refer to previous emails. However, only 1 to 2% never need to. For many businesses, emails and keeping them well organized and accessible is not a consideration until things go wrong. And as we've already seen and heard from Ellie, emails hold vital information that can mean the difference between winning and losing a dispute. So project costs are continuing to spiral, which has led to an increase in disputes within the AEC. Our research found that only 9% of people surveyed this year have not experienced a dispute in the last 12 months. This is significantly higher than the previous 2 years of this research report, beating pre-pandemic records. 63% of organizations reported experiencing a dispute in the business in 2021. This rose to 78% and then 91% this year in 2023. The top 2 causes were issues related to project scope changes and chasing payments. This follows similar trends that we have seen in the previous 2 years of this report. Unfortunately for the industry, issues relating to project scopes are continuing to gain momentum. Why? Because the majority, 85% of information relating to scope changes are stored in emails and formal documents. A shocking 12% of these changes do not reside in a digital space at all, and 11% of respondents highlighted that the only place they are kept is in a project manager's head. In 2020, pre-COVID, this was 6.2%, which shows an alarming increase of AEC firms not formally recording project scope changes in the past 3 years. With findings like these, it's hardly surprising that 90% of businesses are concerned about their project information not being readily available or accessible. In fact, 1/3 of respondents indicated that they are very concerned by this. Understandably, organizations with an email management tool in place, such as Mail Manager, reported less overall concern with their information being visible and accessible by their teams compared to those without a tool in place. We are consistently seeing that failing to make emails visible and accessible to project teams can cause issues that result in legal disputes. According to Arcadis's 2022 Global Construction Disputes Report, the global average value of disputes was $52.6 million, with an average length of 15.4 months. Firms cannot afford to let information like email correspondence slip through the cracks. We've seen this leaky bucket of email negatively affecting AEC firms globally recently. Firms must be aware of their corporate history and be able to provide information on everything that has happened on projects, especially as stakes are so high. In the Grenfell Tower inquiry in the UK, for example, damning emails were uncovered indicating that certain parties were aware that the cladding materials used were unsafe. Given the nature of the industry you operate in, firms need to guarantee information visibility and accessibility to ensure they are making the right decisions. In the best cases, poor information management costs firms money, but in the worst, it makes people unsafe. Given the size of global disputes, the cost of mismanaging emails is immense and includes information being locked away in people's inboxes, staff wasting time looking for the information they need to do their job, staff leaving the business or going on holiday, but a range of important information is trapped in their inbox. With proper email management processes in place, businesses can ensure that all project information and correspondence is captured and accessible by entire project teams. This will reduce the risk of rework and stop project disputes in their track. Plus, you'll have this information to hand years down the line should a liability dispute arise. In recent years, we've seen BIM evolve into information management. After all, properly executed information management processes mean that the right people can access the correct information at the right time, something that is critical in the AEC industry at all project stages. The golden thread of information, or single source of truth, which Ellie talked about, has increasingly been spoken about as a way to ensure that all project information on a construction project is accurate, accessible, and up to date. Maintaining a golden thread is now part of UK law as part of the Building Safety Act 2022. The Act sets out the new safety requirements for higher risk buildings, creating a clear, proportionate framework for the design, construction, and management of safer, high quality homes in the years to come. This Act, which came into effect 5 years post Grenfell, primarily focuses on the safety and standards of all buildings, improving the way higher risk buildings are managed and delivered at every step of the project lifecycle, ensuring clear standards and guidelines that are adhered to, and ensuring that residents are at the heart of building safety. And for the AEC, this means there is now a formal responsibility for complying with building regulations, reducing risk, and maintaining this golden thread. The output of this Act is safer buildings and more accountable contractors. In January this year, some contractors have been found liable for cladding problems on student blocks, and these situations are becoming more and more prevalent. Hence, the strong need for accurate and complete information to be maintained on active and completed projects to protect your firm. Unfortunately, the nature of contracting and supply chain is a free-for-all. There are typically no real audit trails maintained, which leads to a lack of accountability. Proper record management and documentation is imperative to ensure that the continued safety of the built environment globally. It is hardly surprising that with most teams working in a hybrid environment, it's becoming more challenging to access project information and ensure that teams follow information management processes. What we've seen in this report is that while firms are stringent about how their documents and contracts are managed, email is the one thing that everyone manages differently. Without the right tools and automation in place, project teams are left to their own devices, which creates enormous risks, including project delays, unnecessary reworks, which can all lead to disputes. Information is the lifeblood of all project work, but only if it's well organized, accessible, secure, and updated. Losing access to essential emails or not including them in your overall information strategy can prove detrimental to firms. When emails are managed correctly, everyone in an organization has access to the information they need to make the right decisions at the right time. It provides a much better way of working, encourages more transparent communications, and ensures that all team members have access to a single source of truth. Plus, it removes the responsibility of storing and managing data from one person or department. As I said, this has just been a quick overview of Mail Manager's 2023 report. You can read the full report findings on our website. But we see that it's really important to avoid these common headaches. I'm sure that everyone involved in this call today has kind of heard or said any of these kind of phrases that, this isn't what we agreed, questioning when clients have told us things, saying that they're taking over from one of their colleagues and they need a bit of time to kind of get up to speed, questioning if they've ever received a document, chasing a colleague for information because they're going into a meeting and potentially don't have all the information they need, or just generally asking for information to be forwarded on. By implementing an email management solution that helps you maintain a single source of truth, the benefits that you could see is that your information becomes discoverable overnight. You remove the human element so you can automate the processes that people can go through. You can make sure that you're seeing the latest version of the information because you can see the latest email that's been sent. People can become more productive because they're not wasting their time on searching or recreating or doing rework. The increased transparency and visibility just improves everyone's experience on a project. And it means that you comply with Building Safety Acts, but also systems such as ISO accreditation as well. So the way that Mail Manager links into this is that Arup Engineering created the system for their own staff. So Arup are a consulting engineering firm based in the UK, similar story to Buro Happold. So around about 15, 20 years ago, Arup created Mail Manager for their own staff. They recognized all the issues that we've spoken about today, about their staff having too many emails in their inbox. The importance of the information within those emails was only ever going up. And if they ever wanted to go back and find all the relevant information, they knew they could, but it was such a huge task to kind of go and do that. And as Eddie mentioned, it was keeping their lawyers and their C-suite up at night in case anything ever went wrong on one of their projects. Put simply, what they wanted was a way they could find any email across any of their projects in seconds without their staff losing any of their billable time to filing emails. And what they created was Mail Manager. Mail Manager is now available to firms across the AEC industry, and these are the issues that our customers tell us about before they come on board. So they are concerned about not being able to see all the information they need to see, or potentially losing sensitive information that a client has sent them. They're seeing their staff are inefficient because they're spending too much time searching or having to manually spend a Friday afternoon filing their emails. The fact that everyone works slightly differently was a concern, because that meant there was a huge number of different areas where they'd have to go and look for information. And the last one, with they knew the information was in someone's inbox, but if they left the business or were on holiday or not at their desk even, no one else on the project team could access that information. So what I'll do now is I'll go in and do a demonstration. I won't do a full product demonstration. So if you are interested and kind of want to learn more, please do kind of reach out and we can arrange that for you. But what I'll do is I'll focus on the search functionality. So this search is looking at all the emails that I have access to across all the different projects that I'm working on. And this is all current and past employees. So with our search, you can search through the subject line and the body of the text, and you have confidence that all the records are here, because people will be prompted to file their emails, and we can kind of cover that off in a further demonstration. So if I search through these 372,000 emails, I'll search for the word safety. That's going to go through the subject line, the body of the text, and pick out any emails that have that word in. You can specify which specific project you want to look into if you're just concerned about a single topic, single project you're working on, rather than going across all in one go. And you can also specify on the left-hand side when you're looking for. So you can bring up the most recent emails, but you can also go historically. So if you're looking for emails from the beginning of a project, so I know, again, Eddie spoke about scope changes and project creep. You can go back and see what was originally quoted for. So that's picked out nearly 3,500 emails here. We want to see any that contain an attachment. So that's going to take it down now to just under 400. And I can see George is involved in some of these. So if I see any email that George has sent, that's now going to take it down to 4 emails from that 370,000 in a couple of seconds. And this is where we see we can really help firms with the confidence in retrieval, but also maximizing productivity, because users are no longer going to be searching for their emails or spending hours searching for their emails even. So just to kind of finish off the presentation, how we see Mail Manager can help our clients is we're giving users and kind of legal teams, project teams, confidence in retrieval of all their information. You can find any email across any of your projects in seconds. That leads to increased productivity. And going back to ISO and building safety acts, we're giving you one place for all your project information. As I said, it was originally created by Arup Engineering, but there are a host of companies across the UK in the AEC sector now using this tool. And here is some of our bigger name clients. When we talk to these businesses, we generally see they're kind of using a range of different places to store their information. And Mail Manager, we're kind of proud to integrate with a number of software providers, and we're always looking to improve our customers' email experience. So regardless of where you want to file your emails and project correspondence, integrating email into your project management helps remove risk, provide better communication platforms. It frees up users' time for actual project work. It helps you proactively deal with staff turnover. It removes the disconnection between site teams and the office, and it allows teams to be proactive rather than reactive if a dispute ever comes to life. So thank you for listening to my presentation. And if you are interested in learning more, please feel free to download a trial of our software from our website. So I'll stop sharing and I'll hand back to Justin.
Huw, thank you very much. That was great. Lots of scary results in that research, hopefully focusing everyone's minds. Conscious, I know, Huw, that you've got to leave bang on 12, so perhaps we just take a couple of questions for you first, and then we'll get to some of the questions for Ellie thereafter. There's two that I thought kind of interlinked questions. I'll read them both out. What's the rollout like for this? Do you come into a company and tell staff why they need to be using Mail Manager and help with the culture change? And someone else asks, how does Mail Manager, does Mail Manager give onboarding advice to customers about how best to label / archive emails?
Yeah, great question. So the rollout period for Mail Manager is really quick. Our software, the installation time is about 60 to 90 minutes, so your users can be up and running with the tool within a week. We do kind of provide training, so we do kind of initial training for when you first start using the system. We do a follow-up session after a month of you using the system, and we can also report back on your usage through the first year of you using the tool. So we can really help ensure that you do get that culture change. You are kind of seeing people actually use and make best use of the system. In terms of kind of best practice, yes, we can kind of advise how we've seen other companies work, just so that your rollout goes as smoothly as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Another attendee asks, does Mail Manager back up Teams chats?
Interesting question. It doesn't at the moment, but that is on our roadmap, so that is kind of due to kind of come into place later on this year. Okay. Excellent. All right. Let's dig into some questions for Ellie then. I think Ellie, you've answered one or two already, but I might just get you to say those out loud if you can. So there was the one, we've gone from Teams then to WhatsApp. Should WhatsApp be discouraged for communication, information exchange in business?
Yes, please. Ideally, and definitely not Snapchat. That wasn't a sell. Yeah, ideally, I'd love to have it discouraged. I suppose the reality of the world that we live in now, however, is that people will use it, whether you like it or not. So I think the important thing is for employees to be trained in understanding that if they are going to use any platform, social media, any form of instant messaging platform, those things will still be subject to disclosure in legal proceedings. They may, anything that you write down, wherever you write it, may well be looked at by a judge or adjudicator at some point. So just having that mindfulness around what you're saying, because it's very easy in WhatsApp, as I was saying earlier, to kind of speak far more colloquially or honestly, or say things that you wouldn't want someone else to look at later on in those forums particularly. Yeah, sure. And then you mentioned there was a question, do you advise the BIM execution plan to be a contractual or not contractual document? Yeah, so I suppose from a legal perspective, would certainly prefer it to be a contractual document, primarily for the certainty of who's liable for what, who's responsible for what does it actually mean? I think we've got a common problem when we're talking about BIM, that particularly on the client side, people don't always understand what it is that they're asking for, and that execution plan is a really good place for, rather than just saying do some BIM, what is that, what exactly is the scope, much like any other scope discussion, what does that mean, what are we doing and not doing? If you get that in the contract, it's much clearer and much more reliable. But again, I appreciate that's not always commercially viable. Those documents aren't always kind of to the level that you would want for them to be a contractual document. So we do occasionally take a view on that. Yeah. There was a sort of an observation about CRM, which I know you've answered, Ellie, but I'm just going to throw it out to Huw first, then we'll come back to your thoughts on it. So just for everyone's benefit, an attendee said, I'm lucky that I've always used a CRM system for all documents. I only need to chase a few as everything needs to go through the system. Huw? Yeah, so we kind of see a lot of businesses kind of track quotes,
contacts, correspondence in a CRM such as Salesforce, or I think we use HubSpot. However, for almost every business, everyone's inboxes still have thousands of emails in it. So while your CRM does capture some correspondence, it isn't easy searchable, meaning important emails are still unfindable across the business. So CRMs are great, but they weren't designed to solve email management chaos. They are better for kind of customer and prospect relationships. So we still see that there's still kind of a place for a system such as Mail Manager for kind of the filing and finding of important information kind of further on down the line.
Yeah. Ellie, did you want to say what you said about what you wrote about?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't disagree with what Hugh's just said. I think there's a really important place for CRM systems, and I mentioned I've used CMAR in my last role really successfully, actually, because it means both parties have access to the same information. So there's no kind of covert, side conversations going on anywhere. In theory, everything goes through that system. But we know, again, a bit like the WhatsApp thing, people do continue to use email. And so it is important. I think having both is actually really useful.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of other questions for Huw, two from David Huggill. Can a manager access search all staff email who report to the manager? Does Mail Manager give this access or Outlook? And also, can Mail Manager read documents attached to an email?
So the first one in terms of access. So Mail Manager, we don't ever host any of your information. We don't have access to it. The idea is that we'd be storing your emails alongside the rest of your project documentation. So anyone who has access to where you store your documents can file to those folders and can search through them. So if you have any areas of your server, SharePoint, or wherever you're looking to store your documents that are locked down in terms of who can access them, Mail Manager will mirror those permissions. So if you have a managers only area of your server, that would kind of be replicated by our search functionality. In terms of the documents point, so Mail Manager recognizes that an email has documents, and we would never strip out documents when we're saving them. We can save them separately, and you can search for wherever an email has a document attached and the name and the type of the document, but we wouldn't search within the document itself.
Yeah. Okay. And then someone else asks, any interoperability issues to flag? Do you help with this?
So there is no Mail Manager doesn't kind of remove any functionality within Outlook. So from my perspective, not really. What's probably best is if there are any specific functions that you like using within Outlook, probably best to kind of either download a trial or come onto a free demonstration, and we can kind of speak to how you're actually using Outlook and compare and contrast if it that way would still be functional with Mail Manager installed.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I'm conscious of your time, Huw, so I think you're probably almost done there. So throw a few questions at Ellie. What are your views on the? Oh, sorry, my system's just suddenly something's coming at the top. Moved it. What are your views on the design teams having 3 or more sources of truth? 1, BIM model files in collaboration platform, 2, document controller platform, and 3, clash management platform. These 3 platforms can host duplicated information.
I think if we go back to real basics and what we're talking about, kind of what we're trying to achieve through this information management piece and why we might need hold of it quickly, having one source of the truth is really, really helpful. One place to go that has everything in it is probably the utopian scenario. Without getting into the depths of detail of kind of what different platforms do, I suppose if you've got information duplicated, there's a question mark about why you need more than one platform. I think it's going to be a very fact and probably business specific scenario, that one. But I think, the main messages that Huw and I have tried to get across in terms of having one place to go that is an accurate source of all information relating to a project is the main one there.
Yeah. Okay. Can you tell us more about the impact of the extended limitation on Buro Happold's document retention policy and procedures?
Yeah, so I suppose the answer to that's relatively straightforward. So we've now increased, we had a document retention policy previously of 12 years to match statutory limitation. We have now increased that to 15 years across the board. So although that applies specifically to we were talking about the Building Safety Act and the 15 years under the kind of the DPA, and therefore applying specifically to high risk buildings, actually, I think as good practice, where it's not particularly clear when that might bite or not. As I was saying earlier, it's not just about fire and facade. So as a totality, we have now increased our document retention policy to 15 years. Interesting conversations with our IT team about kind of the budgets for that, because I think I probably had a little bit of naivety about the cost of doing that. Actually, from 12 to 15 in my mind, it was an extra 3 years. What's that? Quite a lot, it would seem. So there is a cost to that, but nonetheless, I think in the current where we are now, we can't really avoid that.
Yeah. Perhaps a final question for Huw. Where is the cloud server located?
So Manager doesn't host any of your information, so there's no kind of cloud storage from our side. So if you're looking to store in the cloud yourself, or wherever your kind of cloud information is currently stored is where your emails would be stored as well. So I need to drop off now.
Yes.
I really appreciate all the panelists, Ellie, Justin, yourselves, and everyone kind of joining and kind of sending some great questions. If anyone doesn't have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or the rest of the sales team, and we can kind of go through in more detail. I appreciate everyone's time.
Okay, thanks, Huw. We'll just perhaps one final question for Ellie, which is probably a no comment one anyway, potentially. Without naming names, has missing information been a common problem with any building safety cladding disputes you're aware of?
I suppose I can talk in general terms here about some of the historic projects that we've started to see or hear about, not necessarily involving BH, I hasten to add, but where a facade claim may have previously been statute barred and now no longer is, from the lifting from last June, which creates issues for everybody, on both sides, so both for the claimant and defendant, because you're looking at a dispute and looking at what the state of a building and the condition of the building and what was done by whom, when, what should have been done even pre-Grenfell, and that what we would do now is clearly different to what we would have done then. All sorts of arguments around that, which is difficult because there is a lack of information. But my point really is that there's a lack of information on all sides, so we're all facing that same challenge, which in some ways I'm hoping will, from a BH perspective, protect us somewhat, because if we haven't got the records, it's highly unlikely that contractors or end clients will either, frankly.
Yeah. I know there's a question about ERP, but I think that's not really sort of relevant to you, is it, in that sense, for you to answer? So sorry, Abdul, but we'll take the fifth on that one. Rajendran asks or observes and asks, many clients are increasingly defaulting or delaying contractual payments nowadays. What could be the best remedy other than contract termination, as legal process could take a year or so?
I think depending where the project is, having the right to suspend for non-payment is a really useful tool in that circumstance, and one that we try to deploy. Obviously, if you're talking about projects in the UK, you've got that sort of protection from the Construction Act in any event. But we do have some success outside of the UK in implementing that same right to suspend on notice in the event of non-payment, in addition to your rights to terminate and your rights to accrue interest on late payment. So that might be something worth thinking about. Yeah.
And so that's all the questions. That there is perhaps a question for the rest of the audience, observation question for the rest of the audience to ponder. I'll read it out just so everyone can hear it. I find it interesting that we're all gearing up for improvements in information management and even a cultural change within the industry. That being said, how are the government yet to release an official list of documentation that is required to get through the new gateways? That might be a discussion for some other people at another time. We are nearing the end, so I will share my screen and we'll move to the concluding comments. Let's go out of the way. So This webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand later today via the original registration link. Those who have attended the webinar live will receive an email tomorrow with that link as well. For more on Mail Manager, go to mailmanager.com. For more on Buro Happold, go to burohappold.com. And for more construction and information management news, go to constructionmanagement.co.uk and bimplus.co.uk. Simply remains for me to say thank you very much to Mail Manager for supporting this session. Thank you to Ellie and Huw for their excellent presentations. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. Good afternoon.